So you asked, you're curious to hear my view on the role of longer retreats as part of the Dharma. And in TMI, I offer teachings that can be incorporated into a daily routine. And to me, this seems to be an integral part of the teachings. Absolutely. Nevertheless, I also noticed that for me, retreats are spaces where I can work much more diligently, with much more focus on those practices, and that they often have a positive, long-lasting effect. Once again, I absolutely agree. Yes. Curious to know if you consider retreats a necessary part of the Dharma and how they would be best integrated with the TMI teachings. Once again, absolutely yes, I do consider retreats a necessary part. I'm curious about the length of retreats, weekend, a week, 3 months, and the traditional retreats that can accompany the TMI teachings as well. Well, basically, what the standard thing I tell people in general, and I'm asked this question quite often. So what I mostly tell everybody, but with modifications to suit personal circumstances, of course. In general, as a layperson, the heart of your practice is going to be out of necessity, but it's also very beneficial that the heart of your practice be a regular daily practice that that is producing an interaction between meditation and how you function in daily life. So that's sort of the core of it as a lay person. Now, I strongly recommend that a serious practitioner work towards longer meditations, and to the degree that is possible, maybe doing 2 sessions per day. The value in longer sessions is that things will happen in an hour that are less likely to ever happen in 45 minutes. Things will happen in an hour and 15 minutes that are not as likely to happen or won't happen as readily in an hour set. The other thing is that when you meditate at 2 different times of the day, and say it's morning and evening, the qualitatively, those sits are going to be different. In the one case, you're coming into it post-sleep mode. You won't have done much. Your psyche won't have been stirred up a lot. In the evening, it's just the opposite. The other thing is, depending on your personal diurnal rhythms, if you're a morning person, you're going to be really sharp and clear in the morning, and less so in your evenings. If you're a night owl type, it's going to be just the opposite. Both of these are valuable, and it really doesn't matter what the 2 times of day are that you practice. You're going to have a practice. You're going to have the benefit of practicing in 2 different mental states. You will be 2 of the many people you are, 2 of those people will be meditating every day. So that is extremely valuable. I also encourage a serious practitioner to try to set aside 1 day a week where they do more meditation. Now, this kind of goes back to the original Upasika tradition of the Buddha, where on each quarter of the moon, a day was set aside where lay people would come and join the, in those days, of course, it was a Sangha of wanderers. But the lay people in the local vicinity would come and join the Buddha and his followers, or groups of his followers in other locations. And they would spend that day listening to teachings and meditating. And so I encourage a serious lay practitioner to try to incorporate that into your life. Quarters of the moon, that's about once a week. So if you have regular days off in your week, which most people do, if you can work things so that you can spend a substantial part of that day, or even all of that day, just in study and practice of the Dharma, that will greatly assist your practice. Longer retreats, whether they're weekend, week-long, month-long, whatever combination, more than one retreats, whatever else you can incorporate in your sort of longer term schedule, your annual schedule or whatever, do it. Do it. Yeah. And to the degree that you do it, yes, you're going to get exactly that benefit that you noticed. Now, there's one thing about lay practice versus someone in a more monastic setting. Someone in a more monastic setting, well, of course, it depends on the tradition and it depends on that monastery. Some monasteries work their monks so much and their nuns so much. This is the experience I had with the entire Dharma drum community of practitioners from the oh, what's the name of the island Chinese community that's separate from mainland? Taiwanese. Yeah, the Taiwanese Dharma drum people, a lot of them living in Southern California. And so there are several monasteries in Southern California associated with Dharma drum. And the monks and nuns from those traditions would come to my retreats and I'd talk to them. And they'd say, we all get almost no opportunity to meditate because we're working all the time. And then I give them the same advice that I just gave you for lay people. But in other monastic situations, in a much more traditional setting, the monk or the nun is pretty much withdrawn from the psychological and emotional turbulence of daily life in the world. And they're able to spend much longer periods of time in retreat on a very regular basis. In some cases, they will be able to basically live, most of their time in a state of fairly intensive retreat. So we have two different situations here. Now, I'll just draw your attention to both the elephant diagram and the hoof prints of the ox diagram from the Chan and Zen tradition. And you'll notice in the last part of that is the return to the marketplace in the case of the hoof prints of the ox. And if you look at the elephant diagram, you see the monk is now astride the elephant, going the other direction, back into the world. So this is a very important thing. As a lay person, you're forced to integrate the marketplace, the world, with your practice as you go along. It makes it more challenging, but it also makes it more powerful. Okay? In the case of somebody who can spend a lot of time in meditation in a monastic setting or as a hermit, this person is going to have to return to the marketplace before they can really consolidate their teachings. There is a very often repeated story of a monk who actually left the Sangha wanderers, went off by himself to the forest, reached a point where he thought he had achieved this very high level of awakening. So he went to return to the Sangha and tell them about his experience. And the first crossroads he arrived at, now of course in India that day, every major crossroads was a marketplace, right? Everyone from around there came to the crossroads to sell their produce and their goods that they'd made and to buy what they needed and everything. So this stalwart bhikkhu arrives at a crossroads with the dung all over the roads and the noise and people shouting and arguing and bargaining and all this kind of stuff. And he realized, oh, I'm not quite where I thought I was. And that beautifully expresses it. So, yeah, I hope that contextualizes lay practice as I come to understand it for you. Yes.
Just one thing to add, at this point, most of us who want to retreat are doing it at home with an online component because most of the retreat centers are closed. And one benefit of that, and something Shinzen Young, who's done, I guess, 3 retreats now and is about to do a 4th online, talks about, is the benefit of trying to blend retreat practice at home. And that you get an opportunity to not be in the extreme of totally at home or totally in retreat. Depending on your circumstances, you may be dealing with family members, pets, kids, partners. You may not be able to cut yourself off as entirely because if nothing else, you may have to do more in terms of just food preparation and things like that than you would at many retreat centers. And it gives a wonderful opportunity to try practice in motion, to try to stay in some degree of whatever meditative technique you're doing while you're doing the laundry, while you're preparing meals, while you're washing the dishes, while you're interacting perhaps with a very limited number of people, but people that you can't entirely cut off the way you might have if you had gone to a retreat center for 2 weeks where you put your phone away and turned everything off and had no one to talk to except the meditation interviews and had a downcast gaze and didn't interact with everyone. So it's providing challenges and wonderful opportunities to try to have a much more intensive practice in something that still has some of the challenges of living in the world. And so, depending on what you try to do in this period of time, it's been interesting. I've loved the ones that I've done because, again, it's given me much more opportunity than I've had on most, especially group retreats where so many things are taken care of, where about the only thing you can do in motion is walk up and down someplace. Maybe if it's a retreat longer than a week, there's the opportunity to do your laundry once, but there's not usually, and they're yogi tasks perhaps, but there's not much opportunity to do anything. And so it's been really nice to try to see, can I keep a technique going while I'm doing some of the stuff in daily life? And sort of playing with that, not quite in the marketplace, but also, not 100% closed off where I wouldn't recognize that there are challenges facing me as soon as I get to that crossroads.
Yes. Jonas, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Like both of what you said resonates a lot, and there's another question that comes up, and I think that's maybe the ground of where much of my curiosity comes from, and that's that when I'm on retreats, in very particular, 2 weeks ago, I was sitting a week-long retreat at home, a bit like with friends, and we kind of tried to make our own schedule, and we tried to follow a bit more of a structure during that time. And what we used is we worked with work from Rob Boubea, a teacher from England, and Rob Boubea has written this book, Seeing That Freeze, and he has a few talks where he has whole retreats as recordings. And I found it really, really supportive, and same as with other retreats, right? There are certain structures, certain teachers. But the challenge that I recognized, and that is something that I found really challenging over the past week to kind of integrate that is, it really stirred something up. Like sitting longer stirred something up, things came up, and big part might be that integrating a new teaching, and it was a bit lost. I was a bit like, wow, okay, there are new perspectives in the retreat, there are new kind of teachings taught, and that in contrast to kind of the daily routine of like the daily at least an hour sit, which is very strongly based in the TMI practice, which gives a really clear guideline, and I found it challenging to have this daily routine which has lots of, it's like the thing, I wake up and then I sit down and I have certain, like the 4-stage transition, and it feels very known. And then a retreat space which teaches essentially the same things but uses different words, different concepts. And I think now I'm at a point where I look back and be like, wow, okay, at the core they're very, very similar, but I found that challenging to have a different framework of teaching. And I'm curious to hear if that's just part of the process to recognize kind of challenges, to feel a bit unstable at points, if other people use different words. And speaking to Mark and another friend, Nick, sometimes here as well, really helped me a lot to kind of put those two planes on top of each other. But I think the question underlying is, how do I deal with different teachings if different teachings use different words, and they always come with a little notion of insecurity for me, a little notion of kind of being a bit off balance?
I didn't quite catch that last part. You said something about different teachings,
Yeah.
and then catching a balance.
So the question is, I see value in kind of reaching out to other teachings as well. And especially at a retreat, it's such an intense immersion of like 1 week or 10 days following one particular teaching. And I'm so used to the language you use, to the concepts you use in TMI, that feels very comforting. But if other people use different concepts, it's always a bit of a feeling of, oh, this feels a bit unknown territory. And there's a tendency for me to stay with the TMI framework. And that's a bit the feeling where the curiosity comes, how valuable is it to be exposed to other retreats, other frameworks?
Oh, yes. I would thank you for asking that, because I would really like to offer you some clarification around that. What people sometimes don't realize until I point it out to them is that, yes, the TMI does provide very well-defined vocabulary, and it describes a developmental sequence that, like any developmental sequence, is looked at from a temporal point of view, universal. You have to stand before you can walk, and walk before you can run, and run before you can jump. You know, there's of course all kinds of individual variations on this. Now, any other practice you go to is going to use a different vocabulary, and they're going to approach things in a different way. But I think what you'll find is you'll be able to apply the concepts and vocabulary and the developmental framework in TMI to just about any other teaching. Okay? If there's anything that I've done that is unique, it is to develop that detailed framework. And if you look at all of the different methods and techniques that I introduce, I have taken those from what I've learned from other teachers and their systems. And I have done my best to incorporate those where they fit best into the developmental progression that is the underlying core or armature of TMI. Asanga's 9 stages, transformed a little bit with my own feeling. But yeah, once you can see that, then you have this universal translator that you can apply to other teachers and their teachings. And you can see, aha, this is how I can take, yes, it's very useful to hear another approach, another point of view, another way of presenting things. It is wonderful. It always is going to open up your own understanding to some greater degree. And I encourage that. But the translation process will enhance that. It will only allow you to integrate these things more fully and more effectively, and to be able to appreciate both the differences and the similarities in these things. A different practice will put a different emphasis on certain things. And that emphasis can be extremely valuable when you reach the developmental stage where that is going to be most effective, or when you're dealing with personal idiosyncrasies, so to speak, that certain things will reach your needs more effectively because of that difference in emphasis. Okay. I'd like to go back to, we're in a very interesting time. I think that once the COVID situation is over with, many people are going to continue working at home. I think that these group retreats online are going to be a new ongoing phenomenon long after COVID's over with. It makes retreats more accessible to more people. It simplifies a lot of the, what it does is it puts the burden more on the individual retreatant to handle the logistics of the retreat, rather than the retreat organizer having to organize a whole elaborate thing, rent a facility with enough accommodations, make sure there's kitchen staff and cooking facilities and everything else. This often limits the number of people that can attend a retreat. Online retreats don't have those limitations. Now, of course, in-person retreats will always have certain advantages. Just sitting in the same room with other meditators is a powerful experience that can never be quite the same if the other meditators, although they're meditating at the same time, are not in the same room with you. Although, just as a side note, long before this happened, I had students who would form groups and they'd start a Zoom or a Google Hangout. And then when they were all on, they would close their eyes and meditate together. And it gave them that same sense that you get in a group retreat. What I've been doing, I haven't actually done a group retreat online yet, but I've had a number of people that have done solo retreats at home. And I've made arrangements to be available to do meditation interviews with them 2 or 3 times a week. And by the way, if any of you would like to do that, we can make that arrangement. I'll give you some examples. There's one person, he made an arrangement with his family working at home, just as he would to go away to a retreat. But what he did is he'd rented a cabin, and he went to this cabin and did a solo retreat. And we talked several times a week, 15 minutes, check in, provide some guidance. And he was able to do a very deep and intense solo retreat. There was another person, he is in an urban environment, he rented a basement room uh, adjacent to a park where he could do walking meditations outdoors. And we did the same thing. He made arrangements to have his wife bring him food. And the fact that he could just, he asked me first if it was all right. And I said, absolutely, definitely do this. In order for his wife to feel better about him being unavailable through the duration of his retreat, it was about three weeks long, she would bring him his food each day. And he would have the opportunity to smile at her, right? And they just have that connection. She'd go back home. He'd go into his basement room. There's someone else who's planning a retreat. He's a programmer. He found out he couldn't bank his accumulated time off, was going to lose it all at the end of the year. So he's taking the entire month of December off. We're going to do the same thing. He has a guest bedroom in his house. He's moved all of the furniture out except for a small mattress on the floor and his cushion. He's basically doing the same thing, but at home. And he's going to go outside and walk in his backyard. So you can do all of the things that ordinarily would be much more difficult to do during these times. And I see no reason why this can't be something, it won't be something that people continue to do, even once this external necessity is no longer as acute as it is now. Hi, Tom, Juno, welcome to our discussion.
Hi, Culadasa. I just might want to add, following on to what you just said, that next weekend, Brad Warner, who is sort of well known in the Zen tradition, he wrote a very popular book called Dharma Punks or something like that. I can't remember the name of the book. But anyway, he is doing an online retreat through, I think it's called the Angel City Zen Center, that people can look up. And then in December, there's a wonderful monk here in Canada called Ajahn Sona, and he is at the Birken Forest Monastery in Kamloops. They will probably be doing an online retreat for free. I mean, it's free to attend, to take part in. December, I think it's going to be December 23rd to maybe January the 1st. So for people who aren't going to be with family this Christmas, it might be a good thing to do. And I've done one of his online retreats before, and it was wonderful. So there are two ones that are definitely coming up that people can look at, and something to do over the holidays if you're stuck like I am, not being able to travel.
Wow. Something just occurred to me, Juno. I think it may be possible, and I'll check, to set up a separate page on the Patreon site where any of you can just post any of these online retreats, well, any retreats, but right now it would be online retreats such as these. You could just post them so that people who don't know about it will, yeah, I think that would be a really good idea, and I'll see if we can do that. And then you could add those retreats that you just mentioned to that. And any of you can, anytime you hear anything. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I think that's a great idea. What I'm going to start doing is, when I come across these things, posting them on the Reddit group. So if people aren't aware of that, there's a 30,000 member strong Reddit group for the Mind Illuminated, where people discuss their practices and ask questions. And I will be posting, I always post books and resources and things that I like on there, but I think it'd be great to have that on your Patreon as well, Culadasa. And who knows, you know, your health permitting and time permitting, who knows, maybe one time you might want to do lead an online retreat. What's nice about it is, as you say, the onus on the teacher is not as big, because the students basically take care of themselves for most of the day. The teacher maybe gives a Dharma talk in the evening for an hour online, and what the Canadian Birken Forest Monastery did is they had a different monk in the morning doing a Q&A session with students who wanted to discuss things, like a live YouTube Q&A, because you can broadcast live on YouTube and then people can post their questions in the chat. And so Ajahn Sona was really only required to do the evening Dharma talk, and the rest of the day he did by himself. And the students, you know, have their own schedule that as Elizabeth said, you kind of do to meet whatever needs you have in terms of work and family and all of that. So that might be an option for you to think about doing, Culadasa. And like I said, next weekend, the Angel City Zen retreat with Brad Warner is only 2 days. You know, it's a weekend retreat. So, you know, you could really shape that to meet whatever your health and time needs would allow for, Culadasa. But thank you. There we go. Something to put on the Patreon, certainly.
Great. Wonderful. Ricardo, yes.
Yeah, I think it would be great if it's on the Patreon page, because I don't go regularly or actually at all to the Reddit website. A friend of mine was treated badly by a moderator on the Reddit website, so since then I've not visited it anymore.
Yeah. Well, sad to hear that somebody was treated badly, but yeah, no matter what, I'd like to see it on Patreon, just because there are some people like yourself, for whatever reason, just don't go onto the onto Reddit, even though it has a great reach. Both should be done, and more. We should make this information widely available.
Maybe going back to the thing about different teachings and perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Two things occurred. One is whenever I'm trying to start, you know, somebody posts something about a teacher or recommends something, there's often a sense when I'm working with someone that has a different perspective that it's new and I'm not quite grasping it. And so there's a period of uncertainty and sort of, Shinzen uses the term grasping and groping, you know, trying to figure out what it is they're trying to get across. And if, you know, especially if I have other practices that I'm much more familiar with, there's always just sort of a question of, do I keep trying to sort this out and work with it, or do I go to something that's more comfortable? And, or even within the same teacher, if they've got something new, you know, do I try this new thing that they're pointing to and I don't quite get, or do I go back to a practice that's more comfortable? And so that's always an ongoing dance. And just recognizing that that uncomfortability is natural, and part of the process is part of that. And then, you know, deciding, especially in a retreat format, you may want to spend some of the time doing a familiar practice and then going back to the edge and trying to see if this new thing is something that you can get a grasp of. And then the other is just, I have found it very valuable to work with different teachings. I mean, there's some that I just can't resonate with and I've set them aside, but there are others, certainly Rob Berbea is one where his emphasis is often slightly different than many of the other teachers I've worked with, but very complementary. And so I find it wonderful to listen to some of his Dharma talks and some of the retreat recordings and to read some of his material, because he often will highlight something in a slightly different way that's also in TMI, but the emphasis is just different enough that it's like getting something from a slightly different direction and seeing a whole new perspective on something that getting a slightly different side of the tree that I'm looking at now, and noticing details that I hadn't picked out because he's highlighting something different. So it definitely can be wonderful. And, and then there's some people that, and again, it changes over time. As I've moved in my practice, different people I find complimentary, other people that I used to find wonderful aren't as illuminating anymore, or there are things where it just isn't adding anything right now. So they can be set aside. And then sometimes I circle back around again. It's like, all right, I got what I got out of that for the moment. I'm now working here. And then later, if I go back, it's like, oh, I didn't hear them saying that at all. Right. And so I think it's, it let it be a dance. And one of the things is, especially in an intensive thing, you can't be at the cutting edge of your practice for a whole retreat every moment. It helps sometimes to back off and have a couple of sits where it's a little bit more comfortable, because that's where you kind of reestablish the equanimity, and then I can go forward and try that new thing again. Does that make sense?
Beautifully.
Thanks.
Tom?
Yeah. About different practice, I like to say a few words. What I like with your particular practice is that it's a very pragmatic practice, which can be mixed with many different practices. It's obvious, and that's very important, I think. But for me, the more important is that everybody should reach a point where you find your own practice, and this practice is very personal to you, and there is nothing that can match this personal practice, because it's something that you build over and over. And when you get this core personal practice, then you can incorporate anything. Really, you can try anything. It doesn't matter, because it always will be part that will be like if you want to build a house, that you will find a few things here and a few things there, but it's your own house that you're building, and you get a better and better idea of what it has to look like. It's something that's really belongs to you, and it cannot be completely mixed with anything, and it's it's like believing. I think there should be believing, like how many people there is in the world, there will be as much believing, like anything you believe, you deeply think inside you should be really personal. And it doesn't, I mean, you can share things, but you have to build something really personal in you to be really stable. Otherwise, when you try to go there or try this or that, you always get destabilized, because in fact you don't have this core center in you, and then you just like be shy because, oh, he's saying this, but this one is saying that, and I tried this, but oh, maybe I prefer that. And this is not really good, actually, because that means that you did not have built enough core, inside you. And it's in a way, it's better to follow a way, as long as you get this personal building. And when you get this, then you can just go try other things, because otherwise it makes you feel like, oh, I tried this, I tried that, and at the end, what am I doing? And that's what I wanted to say. I mean, about, I don't know if you agree.
I think you described that very well, and it's very, very true. To the degree that you're just putting on somebody's conceptualized and verbalized version of what they do and what they believe and what they are, to put that on can help you shape what you do and what you believe and so forth. But that's what it should be. You shouldn't try to make that your core, because it's never really going to work. It doesn't fit, right? It's just like you said, the house that comes out of it isn't going to be the one that you need, so forth. And that was a very a very good example there. Yeah.
And what I also think is that if you go in a direction and this direction do not really match with what you hear there or wherever, but this direction, you really feel it, just go forward, follow your own direction. It's always better than follow other direction. You might be wrong, doesn't matter, because it's your own direction. It will be always variable, always. That's what I think.
Yeah. Actually, I'd like to add something to that. Pasquale has joined us. Wonderful. I have a background very steeped in science as a practice. And in science, when things don't match, that's where all of the real meat and juice is. So when you come across those places where, this teaching doesn't agree with that teaching, or this teaching doesn't feel quite right in terms of what I believe. Now, first of all, the attitude of a good scientist is they're not clinging to what they had thought was the best description of reality, right? They're open. Anything is never more than a hypothesis. Even when it attains the level of a theory, that just means it's a unique hypothesis in that so far, for an extended period of time, with huge numbers of people trying out that hypothesis, no one has disproved it. You never, as a scientist, you never say that theory is the final answer, because we know it's not. And you should have the same attitude yourself. And if you approach it that way, like any good scientist, you get excited, not disappointed or frustrated, when something conflicts with what other people are saying, or with what the general consensus is, or with what you've been saying. You get excited about it, not frustrated or disappointed. This is an opportunity to learn something new. And the gamut across the spectrum across which that something new you learn is, it can, at one end, you can basically just discover that this other person's, what they presented was faulty in its premises, or there were problems with their experimental design and so forth. And so then you can very comfortably and safely say, well, I don't need to pursue this any further unless this person or somebody else repeats this work in a more rigorous way. The other end of the spectrum is you realize this is important because everything was done just right, and it definitely contradicts the prevailing view or my work or somebody else's work. Now you're going to not only learn something new, you're going to be able to modify individually and collectively the views. And the same thing's true in meditation of all of these things. Same thing's true in the Dharma about all of these things. You're in your own process with this. All of these things are valuable. Yes, Jonas.
I just feel the strong call to maybe just share a sentence of what has been going on with me for the past month, and deep gratitude for hearing this. Because for about a month, a bit longer, what I had is quite a strong established TMI practice. And I started to read up on seeing that freeze on Rob Bea's framework more and more. And what then happened is my practice shifted really strongly from like the place where there was curiosity and joy and this playfulness of figuring out what's going on, shifted away from the sits and shifted towards the times when I was reading. And I started to get more into a framework of being like, I want to figure out the theories. I want to figure out the part what, oh, the connection is unstable. I hope you can still hear me.
Yeah.
But move more and more towards the part where I think I would call it confusion. I was sitting down and I was sitting down in the sit, and sometimes it took the whole hour where I was just confused and be like, okay, there are 30 practices that I've been just reading up on today, and I just don't know which practice to do. And what helped me a lot over the past week, and I just hear it here again and just feel it's so precious, is kind of a strong calling for, okay, let's distance from that all a bit. Let's recenter. Let's figure out what's the intention, what's the call, and I find that really difficult, because on the one hand there is the wish to explore and to look into different practices, but on the other side there's the feeling that my sits just don't work if I don't have a clear intention, and the more I look, the more difficult it is to kind of recenter myself. And I find that a true challenge, and I find a good encouragement, especially what Tom shared, of saying, if there's a base practice, then you can incorporate others. But I kind of almost threw away the base practices. I was like, I want to be as neutral as possible looking at all these practices. And so thank you what you've shared here about that.
Yes. We've reached a lull in this conversation, and anyone who would like to raise a different topic, or we only had the one question from Jonas today, so.
I guess, sorry, I came in a bit late. I didn't read the time change. Doesn't apply to some places. Sorry. I guess I could ask something. It's been, I don't know if it's really that important, but I probably know the answer, but I thought I'd throw it out there. Sort of like the last couple months, when I was asking a question that I experienced jhana, right, and I wasn't able to get it again, and then a few weeks later, I reread chapter or stage 6 and tried to see if there's anything that I was missing or overlooked, and then I started experiencing it a couple of times again, sort of like the experience matched basically how you wrote it, according to like it was very light, and the pull, I could still feel the pull, and it was kind of perpetuating itself, that kind of thing. And I did it for a couple days in a row, and it felt like I had this kind of gratitude and this feeling like, wow, it's really that simple. It's funny. But then my daughter was born, and then all that just went. And so that's sort of, I kind of wonder, and it's been about a month and a half, and it hasn't happened again. I kind of can reach access concentration a bit, but I guess part of me feels a little bit like I'm on a plateau. Yeah, that's, I don't know if that's really a question, but it's kind of like, I probably know the answer is just to continue doing it in a systematic way.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe if you have any pointers.
Sure. Yes. Well, I'll give you a way of looking at it when something like this happens that might be helpful. And that I found it, you know, having already done years of jhana practice, I found the detailed description of a flow state to just enormously enhance my understanding of what it was I had been doing. Now, it's good advice to say, just keep on doing it and you'll get back to being able to practice jhanas the way they did before. But I feel very comfortable going a step beyond that, a large step beyond that, and saying, keep on doing the practice. And when you are able to reach the same jhanas that you did before, get past access, you're going to find not only can I do it again, this is so much better than it was before. And this is what I believe it is due to. So jhana as a flow state is when there's a coalition of subminds that are very unified around the performance of a particular activity. And we can include under the rubric of activity ways of interpreting and perceiving experience as it arises in the moment, right? Because even if you're juggling and you go into a flow state, or playing basketball and you go into a flow state, there's a profound shift in perception and information processing. And it reflects a coalition of minds, that subminds, that just know exactly what they want to accomplish and how to accomplish it, and do so without any kind of interference from other parts of the mind system. Well, and with jhana as a flow state, you find you can get as far as access, and you directly correlate that with one of life's very disruptive influences, the birth of a new child, sleepless nights, etc., and so on. Now, what happens, and the same thing happens in your daily practice when you find yourself going back, suddenly you're practicing at an earlier stage. Things are going on in your life, the result of which every day when you sit down, there's a slightly different coalition of subminds sharing the intention that brings you to the meditation and to the individual practices within your meditation. To the extent that that coalition includes members that hadn't really participated much in the past, the collective is going to have to, it's going to find itself practicing in an earlier stage and needing to apply the modes of practice appropriate to that early stage. But the effect of that is there are parts of the mind system that had not ever enjoyed the benefit of that training and that experience before that now do. Going forward, the potential coalition of subminds that you bring to meditation is larger, and those external shifts bring different subminds into up and make them active for a period of time, are going to include more of the ones that have participated before. There's going to be, you're not going to have to go back as far, right? So it's good, it's positive. Every time you find, well, okay, I was practicing and I was, you know, and now all of a sudden it's like, wow, okay, welcome to the group, you guys. We're going to bring you up to speed. We're really happy to have you. And we're really happy to bring you up to speed. We're not going to say, oh no, another newbie.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that when I asked the question on the last prior Zoom meeting about, you mentioned that if, a new situation comes, then you're not just growing up, you're also widening as well. And that's why I kind of thought, okay, that's probably what happened or what's happening. And I thought, okay, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. I'm like, oh my God, how long is this taking? I mean, then I started thinking maybe I should ask something. So it seems like that's what's going on. And yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Ricardo?
I have a question. I haven't formulated it until now, so I'm not sure how it's going to come out. But do you have any suggestions, or can you remind me of any suggestions you give in the book about what to do when intensely emotionally charged thoughts and mental images come to your meditation and you feel like you do not have the willpower to to move away from that? It's just too seducing, it's just too alluring. That you are kind of aware that you are there, but you simply do not have the strength to pull the mind out of that and bring it to the breath or whatever technique you're doing.
Yes. Yes. I'm sure everyone here can relate to that. You have things come up and they're more than you can resist in the moment. So you finesse the situation. First of all, you don't resist, but you don't succumb either. Okay. Instead, you allow, you permit, but you don't indulge it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's also very difficult, but yes, it makes sense.
Yeah. Now, there's 2 flavors to this. Of course, one is it's attractive. You like it. It feels good. You like it better, right? The other is it's uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. And it's captivating because of that. It's like, ooh, and I can't stop. All right.
Yeah.
But so it's a little bit harder to see the last one in the same terms, but underlying it is the same. There is a fundamental reward that comes from focusing on the negative because it has saved your butt in so many different ways before.
Yeah. In
Right.
this case, it's desire, though.
Yeah. So you bring to this the wisdom that you have that, look, this may or may not be a real problem, but either way, I'm not going to resolve it right now. All right, the same thing. I'm not going to succumb. I'm not going to indulge in this worry, anxiety, fear mode either. But I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to accept it. I'm going to recognize that, okay, it's there. It's real. It's part of who I am in this moment. But the rest of me doesn't have to jump on the same train. We can wait it out.
Yeah, it feels like that. It feels like a part of me is jumping on that train and a part of me is staying watching. And but it still feels like, the part of myself that is jumping on the train is indulging in the pleasure of the desire.
Yes, exactly. That's right. That's one of the things that becomes really, really obvious when you're doing second path practice, is that there is a pleasure associated with craving, even if that craving is in the form of aversion. Whether it's desire or aversion, craving has its own positive affect. It's subtle because the other affect tends to, the affect due to uh, to the valence of the experience is going to be overpoweringly strong. When that becomes diminished and it's in second path, then you begin to realize the degree to which there's craving for craving. Why do people enjoy window shopping, quote, for something that they know they can never afford and they don't really need? Bottom line, it's for exactly the same reason as why people watch, this is appropriate for day after Halloween, people watch horror movies, listen to sad songs, etc., and so on. There is a pleasure in, there is craving, whether in the form of desire or aversion, has its own pleasure, its own positive affect.
So one should try to, so that when you see that happening, right, and you see yourself splitting into half, and one half is indulging and the other half is watching.
Yeah.
What's the idea there? You just stay there watching with the half that you have, or you try to bring more of the minds that were indulging into the observing stance,
Mm-hmm.
or you just let them be there. You just let them indulge and watch them while they are doing that.
It's all of those with skillfulness, and your skillfulness will improve every time this happens, and this will keep happening. What would you do if a good friend of yours or a family member or your child or whatever was going through something and you could see that they were just making a whole lot more out of it than it really, well, it's not going to help to tell them, stop it, right? Cut it out. Look what you're doing. No, forget that. Although there will be a place for that. At some point, they will be open to you gently nudging them in the direction of seeing that for themselves. In the meantime, you accept. You can be there for them without buying into their, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. I think where that analogy kind of breaks is that the half that is indulging also feels like it's me, right? It's like the hat is everywhere. It's there sometimes and it's back here watching sometimes, and it goes forth and back.
There's a little trick that that you can do. I discovered this a few years ago and had some people who were in long-term retreat, and an older woman, very advanced practitioner who lived with us. And they began doing this. And more recently, I had a discussion with people where I reminded them of this and suggested that they try it. Try to get away from I thinking to we thinking. In your self-talk, instead of everything that comes up is I. Instead, it's we, in the plural. Okay, so we, as in some of us, are confused and indulging, but we also meaning the rest of us, can see that happening and know that it's not really going to be helpful and valuable, but that it is something that has to get worked through, right? Just try that. Turn your self-talk into we. It's not like I shouldn't have done that. It's like we should remember not to do that next time, right, guys? There's the internal identification of some part of your mind with another part of your mind. It's we, it's us. Together, we should do better, but we shouldn't beat ourselves up. And most especially, we shouldn't confuse ourselves by calling both of us I.
Yeah. I'll try that.
We think in much more accurate description of reality anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Tom.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to what Ricardo said. This kind of problem during meditation is what I call obsession. You know, sometimes it happens, it can be desire, it can be aversion. You know, there is something there, and you know, you start your meditation, and in a few minutes you realize it's dead, because this obsession, whatever it's pleasant or unpleasant, can be pain, can be, you know, anything. It's just really, really strong. And what I realized is, okay, sometimes you just, there's nothing you can do. So you try for a while and well, I stop my meditation, that's it. But sometimes it worth keep going, because I really had quite really good meditation when I can overcome the state. And it happened, but it takes time. And that's the problem. But sometimes, like, let's say after minimum 1 hour, sometimes even more, then I deepen my meditation and the obsession is gone. And I can really like go inside jhana really deeply. And then that's really, really good, because there is a really good feeling of saying, wow, I completely just, you know, like get rid of this obsession or whatever. And this is really, it's worth trying, you know, like you have this obsession and you say, you know, like it's writing in the Satipatthana, well, there is this in your body, there is this in your body, there is this in your mind, there is this in your mind. Okay, but just I keep going, you know, I won't give up, but quietly, of course, just go on, and I go on, and I go on, and this obsession is there. Sometimes it's pain, you know, this pain won't go, just because like I have a bad complexion, and sometimes it's bad. I don't care. I go on, I go on. And when you reach the point like access concentration, where it's sometimes it's really funny, because you think like this obsession and like desire can be really, really strong obsession in your mind. And you might think that it will never go. You know, it's just like, it's dead for this meditation. But sometimes it just go, like in a few minutes, and it's a little bit of magic. How is that possible? And same for pain. Pain can be really strong for 3/4, 1 hour, and in a few minutes, and then you get inside really deep meditation. So I don't say it's always happen, but it's worth trying when you have an obsession and a really strong one, and you know, like, whoa, it's not going to do it. I know it. Just go on. If you have time, just try like 1 hour, 1.5 hours. Just try it, and until you reach a deeper meditation, because it really teaches you something that you can really overcome all those hindrances, you know, whatever you call it. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. That sounds like good advice. I should have tried that yesterday night. I kept on going, but when the ring bell when the bell rang at 45 minutes, I stopped. It was my night sitting, so I went to sleep, and actually I was not able to sleep until 5:30 or more, I don't know, 6 a.m. So, and crazily enough, today I woke up without any alarm, like at, I don't know, at 11 or something.
If you really want to try it, you must have any alarm. Like, it's just like, I go on, I won't give up. You know, I go on, you know, you don't care. You forget the alarm, you forget you have to do. You just say, okay, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, I go on. You know, I won't give up. I won't give up until everything is gone. Myself is gone, no more obsession. That's worth trying. Of course, if you have an alarm after 3/4 an hour or 1 hour, it won't do the job, because you know, you already, like, you already, you start like you already lost, you know, you just say, oh, no, I know, like there is 15 minutes left, it's gone. So it cannot work this way.
Yeah, thank you.
Thomas?
I have a question to that. And maybe the question just originates out of being at a very different point with my practice. But one of the things, like, my practice, I think I'm playing around with kind of chapter or stage 6, kind of at the cusp of getting the first idea of where the first jhana could be, and maybe not even quite there. And what you say, Tom, is something that resonates a lot. But what I also recognize is my meditations work if I'm relaxed, if I'm sit there and if I'm really quite open to what happens. But as soon as I'm tense, as soon as I tense up too much, it just feels like a rock. I can observe the rock, but it's a rock. There's nothing moving. There's nothing really happening. And for me, there's real value in playing around with the effort. And for me, the thing is that the right point is much, much more on the very, very little effort side. And I'm curious to hear, like what Tom said, like there is this idea of sitting through and see what happens, but how can I combine this approach with the little effort, with lightness? Is there anything to say about that combination?
Well, what I would say, first of all, is you really touched on the answer to this when you said play around with effort. Play around with whatever there is to play around with. You know, be open and flexible in your thinking about the situation. And maybe using the word thinking could be a little bit of a misleading, but you know what I mean. What arises in your mind as what to do in that situation. Play around with the things that you can play around with. But the other thing is, there is in these things a potential point of diminishing returns. That it's rather than continuing to being able to stay in this place of relative objectivity about it, play with the different variables that you can play with, comes a point where it's just getting worse. And no matter what you play around with, or how, more effort, less effort, more this, more less that, it just keeps getting worse. That's the time when discretion is the better part of valor, right? But play around, and that includes with playing around with, should I sit through this, or should I save it for next time?
Yeah.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, just the point about effort I thought was interesting, and it was something Michael Taft made a point of in a class I have with him, is we all tend to have sort of different predispositions of how much effort feels right. And for some of that, our tendency is always to put in a lot of effort. For other people, it's to put in very little. And sometimes it really is helpful to start playing with that, because what your default may not actually be what's true in general in meditation or in the specific meditation. because some of that effortness comes from our general conditioning and how we approach life in general. And so some people are very, push the accelerator all the way to the floor. That's how I live my life. In meditation, you may need to back off, and the sweet spot may actually feel like I'm barely efforting, or vice versa. And you have other clues. You have dullness. You have, is there any clarity in the meditation? So you have other clues to get some sense of where that is. But I thought it was a very interesting point of just don't assume that kind of my default mode of how much effort I ought to put into something is what I ought to be doing in this meditation or in meditation in general. And just what Culadasa was saying about play with this, of make sure, that that's one of the things you examine and re-examine as time goes on, because it does help sometimes to not just have that as a default and never changes, but to have it as one of the things that you play with as you go along. And I think especially there's a tendency in a fair amount of the Dharma world to think that we ought to be practicing with our hair on fire with a lot of effort. And that recognition that no, sometimes I really do need to be practicing in a much wider open, very gentle way is also appropriate. And to make sure I leave space for that in my practice, and not to feel bad when I see posts by somebody that did something outrageous, and effortful, and think that that's the way I ought to be, when actually, no, at the moment for what I'm doing, I actually need to allow there to be room for this gentle, very spacious approach, because that's what's needed.
I'm curious to link this point. Oh, okay, yeah. I'm curious to link the point you just mentioned a little bit to the point we had at the beginning of the talk about the retreats. Mm-hmm. Because for me, the retreats are a very similar point in the sense that effort can also translate to the amount of time I'm sitting. Mm-hmm. And on the one side, there is this call for maybe not setting a timer, just sit and see what feels right. And if I reach a point where it feels like this is my limit, to then stop. But then a retreat setting is a setting where, like, it's for me at least, maybe that changes, but I'm not at a point I'm like, oh, I sit and now I sit for like 12 hours a day. A retreat is more a setting where I'm kind of more top-down control. I'm like, okay, I set aside the next 5 days and I will sit according to this schedule. And how can the notion of kind of playing around with that play in there? Or is there something to say that for like those retreat settings, there's something to be like, there are a few things where a bit of pushing just is important to get somewhere?
I mean, for me, it's varied. I mean, I've gone on group retreats where they've had a schedule, and I've occasionally, I remember one where instead of going to one of the afternoon sits, so they had walking meditation or breaks, walking meditation, and people were going in and out. And I wound up just sitting down by the lake for sequential sits. And it turned out to be one of the best things I'd ever done, because I needed that break of just relaxing. And it wasn't as if I wasn't doing a practice, but it was just to be in nature and sitting kind of lent a spaciousness that carried over. I think so. Even on a fairly formal retreat, if the management allows, there's generally most of the ones I've been on, there's been a suggested schedule, but it wasn't as if for most of them you could alter it and do something as long as you stayed within the retreat boundaries and things like that. So I think it's certainly possible to adjust depending on the flow of things. I've also done certainly solo retreats where I've tried to do a lot of meditation, but again, I let the practice guide what I did next. So, whether I would take more of a break in the afternoon, whether I would do more walking, whether I would just go sit someplace in nature instead of back on my cushion. I let my practice kind of guide that, and knowing, I wasn't going to goof off and go back on the internet, but I was also not going to say, I must be on this cushion for 45 minutes now. That said, there is value at times, and I've found value at times of trying to meet a schedule and just seeing what happens, or on doing all night sits, literally all night sits, with walking and movement periods so that we didn't all just fall asleep. But so it's been interesting to challenge myself. It's also been very interesting to give myself permission to go outside the bounds of a suggested schedule. And when it felt like, no, I just need to relax and see what's gonna arise.
Yes, Ricardo.
To me, Jonas, it feels like we are conflating maybe two different types of effort. One effort is like the effort related to stage 1 practice, which is the effort of saying, okay, I'm going to sit now and I'm going to try my best for X amount of time. But then when you actually sit and when you start your meditation, there's the other type of effort, which is how much I'm trying to control my attention, how much I'm monitoring, and all those aspects related to other kind of efforts. And I think what Tom was saying was, he was not saying put all the efforts up. He was just saying, put the kind of effort that is required for stage 1 practice up, and the rest leave it below. Leave it, well, play with them, of course, but they're free.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And you're right. You should not conflate these two. What you should do is integrate these two. Remember, 1/8 of the Eightfold Path is right effort, right? Which says, okay, there's something that we could call wrong effort, right? And so effort as effort is not bad, but there's skillful effort, right effort, joyful effort is another way of seeing it, my preferred way. But yeah, the retreat instructions I always give, and this was the first retreat instructions I ever received. And I still, to this day, believe it's the best retreat instructions that can be given. And it extends to daily practice as well. But the retreat instructions I was given on my very first retreat, and for that matter, every retreat I attended for a couple of years thereafter, was from the time you wake up until the time you go to sleep, at least, always be basically in a meditation state. Whether you're brushing your teeth, going to the bathroom, getting dressed, eating, whatever it is, practice stable attention. And well, I wasn't told in terms of attention and awareness because my teacher didn't have that terminology available then. But basically, you never stop practicing just because you're not sitting or just because you're not walking, doing a walking practice. Now, what this means then is the next part of the instruction is you have a schedule that says sit from this time to this time, walk from this time to this time. That is a guideline. Follow that. But when you feel like, I'm just going to sit right through the next walking session, and I might even sit through the next sitting session as well. I'll decide when the time comes, but I'm not going to get up and go out and walk right now. The same thing can happen. It's time to go back and sit. But you are getting too much out of the walking meditation to want to go back and sit. it's working. It's giving you something that you need. It's powerful. The admonition to never stop meditating is the key to making these kinds of decisions that are not either self-indulgent or wrong effort. So self-indulgence would come about if you chose not to go sit, not because the walking or whatever else you're doing is very productive, but because you'd rather do something else rather than go sit. That's the time you need some other kind of effort, a right effort, to say, okay, the time to walk or the time to sit has come, and I'm going to go to the meditation hall. I'm going to sit with everyone else. But if you're doing something that's already very productive, whether it's sitting or walking, or it doesn't matter what it is, there is no need to stop doing it. You're still practicing. Tom.
Yeah, it's a big question, this question of effort. I really have a way of saying meditation similar to sport. You in sport, if you want to be good, like in cycling, you have to do a lot of cycling. There's no way that you can be good if you don't do a lot of cycling. But the problem is so you have to do a lot of effort. Of course, the problem is you have to get pleasure in it, because if you don't have any pleasure doing it, your effort will be really effort and it's going to be bad. And that's exactly the same in meditation, to my view. It's just like when you sit, you should try to be as pleasant, as comfortable, as cool as you can. It can always work this way, but that's the only way to really do a lot of sitting, and it's challenging, especially when you are in retreat, because in retreat, like I've done many meditation retreat in Weka centers, and it's really tough because it's 10-hour meditation sitting every day, and you don't choose, you have to go there. So you really have to try to get inside it, like yes, I just get inside it, because otherwise it's gonna be hell. And it's I wouldn't recommend for many things this kind of retreat, but there is one good thing about those retreats, is that it really teaches you how to just do it, don't question, because it's so much that you just like, okay, I go there, I go back, I sit, and you really have to find a way to be comfortable with this, with so much effort, in a way that it has to become effortless. And it's much more difficult to do this out of retreat, because out of retreat you can do whatever you want, and that's the problem. It's just like, okay, I don't want to sit anymore, I don't sit anymore. But how can you just try to push yourself 1 hour, 2 hour, I mean even more if you can, and take really lots of pleasure in it? It's like it's effortless, and that makes a difference, I believe.
You are so right, Tom. I mean, I agree with everything you say. And we're already past an hour and a half, but I just, back to right effort as joyful effort. Now, the joy may not always be obvious in the effort you're making, but look for the joy. Right from the beginning, I tell meditators, look for the joy, no matter what you're doing. If you're making effort, you may have to look for the joy. But if you find it, then that effort becomes right effort. It becomes joyful effort. If you can't find the joy, it's wrong effort. If you try, if you look for the joy and there is just no joy in it, all you find is pain and sorrow, it's not right effort. Better change your tactics. That's the time to take a different approach. Yeah. Like a person training in cycling knows, if I keep doing more, I'm going to do less. I'm going to do damage. I'm going to harm myself, right? It's time to stop pushing. I need to recover. Not only that, in cycling, as in meditation, a cyclist doesn't only cycle, right? At least, well, I mean, a hobby cyclist might only cycle and get to be a pretty good cyclist. If you wanted to compete in the Tour de France, you're going to have to train in a whole lot of other ways to build up other aspects of your physical stamina and resilience and strength and all of these things. And yeah.
I think, Culadasa, the general theme you've given there is that try and make your life your practice, because in every moment of daily living, it can be a practice. And I've particularly found this with, and people are talking about difficult mental images coming up or whatever, but I found it particularly moments of pain, physical or emotional, are incredibly fecund, fertile moments of practice. Once you've developed once you've developed the mindfulness, the ability to really focus on that sensation or pain or whatever, and then you find that inside that pain there is a seed of satisfaction. I don't even know want to call it satisfaction, but there is a seed of wholesomeness in that pain if you can just relax around it, and it'll come out. It's very difficult to explain, but I think it's what Shinzen Yang would call the flavor of purification. And I found that sometimes in the moments of my deepest physical pain, like even if I'm just having a cramp in my leg when I'm walking, once I got to about stage 5, 6, where I could really use my attention skillfully, I could go right into that cramp and I would see how it would sort of unfold and flower in a way. Even though I was still feeling the pain, I could see a kind of a seed of release in it. I don't know how else to put it. I hope that I've said something useful there.
Thank you. That was useful. Well, it's been a great discussion. Thank you all for coming, and look forward to meeting with you again in 2 weeks. So stay well, be happy.
Thank you.